Oh, hi, Kendra.
Hello.
How's it going?
Excellent. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. I think I need more coffee. I'm kind of I need to kick it up a notch. Hey everybody, thank you for joining us for another episode of Modern Sales Power Hour. Before we get started here, we're gonna let folks trickle in. I'm really pumped to have Kendra here to be talking all things sales talent, of which she knows just a little bit, and by a little bit I mean a hell of a lot. Um, Kendra, maybe a little icebreaker. I know that you recently moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. What's your favorite restaurant there for
I,
folks who might be swinging by? What's
I-
the recommendation?
how did I know you were going to ask that?
Do you not
Um,
have one yet? I could
well,
give mine in San Francisco. Our favorite restaurant here is Francis. Right, that's my wife's favorite restaurant, and it's like on the border of the Castro and Dolores Park. Do you have one yet with you and
no, I
your
do.
boyfriend
I
there
do.
yet, or you do? Oh, okay. What is it?
It's outside of Charlotte, though, and it's called Epic Chop House.
Ah,
It's delectable. It's delectable. And it's one of the only places, which just blew my mind, in the state that offers Wagyu. I'm like, how
oh,
is that possible?
there you
But yeah,
go. It's like,
it,
incremental, future career if you ever get out of search and kind of talent management. Seems like they're probably not the thing to do. Like go work on a restaurant where there's no money.
probably not.
Killer. Well, folks, thanks for joining us for Modern Sales Power. I'm Pete Kazanjy. While we're waiting, like to give everyone a few minutes to get familiar with the Goalcast webinar interface here. So this event encourages audience participation, so please do use the chat panel. It's in the upper right-hand corner right there. Use the chat panel, use the Q&A panel. We're here to kind of answer any of your questions. Let us know where you're calling from and what you're most excited to learn about today from our illustrious guest, Kendra from Candidate Labs. Um, Cool. So let's go ahead and get started. For folks who are not familiar, Power Hour is hosted by Modern Sales Pros. MSP is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, and related disciplines. And the community's mission is it's pretty straightforward. It's to create an environment for our 30K and growing members to answer questions that they'd struggle to solve on their own, help them see around corners they may not know about, just in general, like get better, right? Get better at what they do. And the way that we do that is through great live sessions like this, right? Like this, what you're about to experience here through our robust online forum, which is pretty dope, and in-person events as well. And so for folks who weren't previously admitted, you should now have access to the community. Before we get started, just a few reminders. Power Hour is a little bit of a unique format. There's not necessarily a specific piece of content that we're going to be going through. It's more that we're here to pick the brain of the revenue leader that we have as our illustrious guest here. So you're here to learn. This is, we'd love your Q&A. Please ask questions, use the chat, use the Q&A tab, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, let's go ahead and head into some introductions here. I'll make mine quick because I'm not the show. Kendra's the show here. I'm Pete Kazanjy. I'm one of the founders of MSP. I'm also a co-founder of Atrium. Atrium makes data-driven sales management software that helps sales organizations use metrics to improve team performance. Prior to Atrium, I started a recruiting software company called TalentBin that was acquired by Monster Worldwide. Kendra, I bet you didn't know that I had a background in recruiting.
It's
Bet you
you.
didn't know that. Yeah,
Wow.
I try to hide it.
You even need me here? You've got
I know.
this.
I I don't know. It was tech recruiting. It wasn't
Oh,
sales recruiting.
all
Different
right. All
beast.
right. We good.
Different animals. But yeah, I'm super excited to have Kendra here today. She has a really storied career in sales talent, right? So, right now she's the chief customer officer at Candidate Labs, which is a modern recruiting platform for revenue staff. I'm going to go ahead and let Kendra introduce herself and say a little bit about Candidate Labs, and then maybe give a little bit of context about her background before joining Candidate Labs. Kendra?
Sure. So thank you. And thank you for the opportunity. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah.
I'll start with me because this is all about me. No, I'm kidding. But um, I am currently the Chief Customer Officer over at Labs. Today actually is my 2-year anniversary.
Oh
The
wow.
last year has felt like 10, but I'm sure a lot of us can say the same thing.
Mhm.
And I get involved with everything agency and business development. So everything outside of our amazing PDE organization kind of is in my bailiwick. Before then, I had 2 years, right under 2 years with Betts Recruiting, where I did a
Yep.
lot of really customer engagement, ensuring that workflows and processes and all of that was buttoned up based on the velocity in which we were recruiting at that time. And before then, I have, 18 years of executive search experience, primarily seed funded, really through B or C, and not just focus on sales, although sales is obviously core, but a lot of just the go to market functions across the board. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me. Lots and lots of iterations of search and how it ebbs and flows. To give a little bit more about Candidate Labs, as you jumped into a
Please.
little bit, where we're a little bit unique is that we're actually a VC-backed, tech-enabled modern search firm, really built like the technology companies that we work with. So
Okay.
from marketing to business development to CS to PDE, we really feel the kind of the pain, the first world pain of understanding and knowing the differences of what hires need to look like, and from a skill set perspective, from a stage comfort perspective. From early stage kind of all the way through. And I think, where we really excel is marrying the data, the technology, but then not forgetting the people, and that alchemy and kind of human ingenuity that is attached to good search. And the technology really just enables us to find bi-directional fits much faster. And like I alluded to, I think earlier, I don't know, I've been talking all day, but we are founded by repeat entrepreneurs. So everything we do is very founder led, which also feels a little bit different than the traditional search firm. Shameless plug, we were voted #1 on G2 last year, which is, a big
Nice.
high five. Yeah, we've only been around for around 3 years. So,
Wow.
yeah, so we're making waves. We're making waves.
I love it. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I think there's a lot of kind of people are thinking a lot about like their talent strategies right now. A lot of organizations are right sizing their sales organizations. They're trying to figure out like maybe they're reevaluating what their sales efficiencies look like, and potentially what that means about like what their staffing strategies might look like, what their appropriate profile might look like, et cetera. So I think we'll have a lot of things to talk about there. So I think the first thing to kind of like talk through is, how have the recent kind of tech layoffs impacted hiring in your estimation, based on kind of like what you're seeing with your customers and in the market?
It's been a wild ride and a moment of
I
silence for those that have been affected.
yeah, wild ride sounds about right.
Yeah, yeah. So it's been, but really, in all seriousness, it has. I think since Q2 of last year, it was, oh my gosh, what's happening in the world? A lot of searches went on pause. Why? While companies really figured out what does all of this mean to us with all of the different variables that were going on.
Yep.
So there was just a lot of pause, and a lot of companies got funding. There were a lot of first-time founders out there that were figuring it out, that had only seen a great market and were only kind of the mantra of hire at all costs. That's how we're going to get the higher
Yep.
valuations in our next round of funding. And so I think, Q2 was like, and then
Er,
Q3, right? Then we started to see like things pick back up, decisions were made, and we saw a lot of hiring happen in Q3. So Q3
mhm,
remains bullish, and then
mhm.
enter Q4 with, the November of doom, where I think it was the highest number of layoffs all year round in the tech industry. And so it just is created a lot of noise and a lot of confusion around, do we hire, don't we hire? Are there a lot more candidates out there? Do we need outside resources? Do we need internal? So I would say that there's just been, now we're really seeing a lot of like, okay, we're figuring it out. We're in strategic planning, but I think that there is a lot of people have gone from reactivity to
Mhm.
really a thoughtful kind of, how do we move forward now? I think that there's been, after the layoffs, there's been a lot of, kind of reevaluation of the talent that's on the ground right now, and how do we retain them, and how do we enable them to get better and to produce better, whatever the functional area might be. So we're seeing a lot of good retention strategies. But I
Yep.
would say that, at first, and it's again very noisy too, as far as a lot of people doing inbound applications, a
Mhm.
lot of networking going on. So I'd say overall there was almost like a freeze, and then it was, we'll figure it out. And now we're starting to see things pick back up in a much more thoughtful way.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, thoughtful probably seems like a great phrase for that because I think one of the problems that like in the go kind of times of um 2021 and excuse me 2022, a lot of organizations really like it was it was kind of like a really like aggressive game of musical chairs, if
Yeah,
you will,
yeah.
um, where what you had was a lot of organizations were bidding at talent in a very kind of like thirsty fashion,
Hmm.
um, and just like really 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 wanting to get butts in seats and not and I think you actually had a really good phrase for it earlier, um, around bidirectional fit
Yes.
and I think I see this a lot with entrepreneurs that I work with or like investors that I work with or you know um, sales leaders that I work with. Actually, less on the sales leader side. It's more the entrepreneurs than in investors. And essentially, it's like comprehending what the profile ought to look like, and making sure that the candidate has the appropriate skill profile
Yep.
and not just subject matter expertise because you don't want to you don't want to fully constrain your search to people who have like sold to the same buyer previously because like you're probably going to pretty heavily constrain your the search kind of the candidate there, but
Powerful.
making sure that the the sales motions like rhyme, if you
Totally.
will.
Totally.
And I think that kind of like went out the window, and you had you had organizations that have like maybe a more technical sales motion being like, cool man, like you've got a pulse and you can smile, great, get in here, even though like there's no way that that rep was going to be able to talk to a sales operations person or talk to a DevOps person or talk to XYZ. So now that things are like maybe slowed down a little bit, how are you seeing folks kind of modify their hiring to be more thoughtful and more intentional in that
Yeah.
regard?
That's a great question, and it was tough to be part of that. In all candor, as as search professionals, where there was this rush, and we saw this over leveling, oftentimes, where
Yes.
we needed a salesperson. They haven't managed before, but I think they've got good potential, and we're gonna make them a director of sales, and they'll figure it out because they worked underneath a good VP, and we need a demand gen person, a director. And yes, they've done this, but it's only a couple years, but they put together some great campaigns and have some good
Yep.
outreach. And unfortunately, we're really starting to see the backlash of that right now, where we went from peacetime into wartime now. And it's like skill sets are being outed, and now companies are leaning on people to do their functions that they hired for. And in some instances, there's really a mismatch on skills. So we're actually seeing a rise on confidential replacements happening right now, where companies are going, wait, we still need this, and now we need it more than ever. And unfortunately, we made those hires in a rush. So I think that, and not to mention, huge compensation packages that were insane. You couldn't go much higher than we were starting to
Yeah.
see for a
And
while.
like kind of yeah, and like kind of out of alignment. That's actually a really interesting thing because it's kind of like everything is like 30% off now, if you will. And like it's kind of and what I mean by that is like whether you're talking about, you know, the private shares in a company, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
valuations have dropped. Customer acquisition costs have dropped.
Yeah.
And but the funny thing is that you have some of these folks who were hired, maybe you're talking about like account executives or like marketers or like CS folks or whatever, hired in the high water time. Um, how do organizations like maybe like rebase that? Like it's kind of like difficult to be like, hey man, like you came in here at like a 180 OT, but like there's no fucking way that like
Yeah.
that's gonna fly. Like probably the reality is like 140 there, and like if that person were to go out in the market today, that's what they would actually command. But here you are, you have this person who's kind of like upside down. How do organizations like? Is there an elegant way for organizations to contend with that, or too bad, so sad?
I think it just depends on the leadership and what their philosophy is. But what we found to be really interesting, though, is that compensation packages are still remaining fairly strong across the go-to-market functions. So we were waiting. We were like, all right, so now you're going to be able to get a bargain. And it's less about that. The bidding wars, yes, the bidding wars are really over, although top candidates will still have options, with the number one option being staying where they are, potentially asking for that counter offer and getting it because they've already established their value there. But we are still seeing compensation packages just for new searches that are going out, still staying fairly strong. Again, not crazy, but fairly consistent. And we've checked in QBRs just recently with a number of our VC partners, and they're kind of scratching their heads saying the same thing, and giving that advice to their portcos is like, wait, hold on, it's not exactly discount Friday right now. It's like we still need to. There's still a war for great talent. That's not necessarily gone away. But what we are seeing is just retention. So we're seeing companies that are now looking as they, look at compensation plans going into 2023, and they're like, what are the benchmarks out there? How are we competitive? And what you're seeing is like some of the legacy folks that were under comp. This was a huge problem last year, is like you would have a CS team, you'd have your early, like the ones that did the hardcore work, right? They put everything, the framework, the structure in place. And then there were new people that were hired that were less experienced, that were more expensive. So I think companies are taking this opportunity rather than necessarily jacking these people down, although that is happening with good alignment to what the functional areas are. But we're seeing the legacy folks, those compensation packages go up, which is about time, is what I'll say. Like about time that there's some parity across the board with that. So people aren't actually punished for staying with the companies that they've been part of for the longer journey.
Got it. That's surprising to me. I mean, I believe you because you guys have the data, but like, wow.
Yeah.
So I guess that maybe that would be that's good, kind of folds with my next kind of question here, which is obviously that seems like there was a little bit of a misconception that or misassumption that I had there. What are some of the other kind of biggest misconceptions that hiring managers have right now that they maybe need to reconsider?
I would say that it's really important, if you're hiring right now, to vet true interest in the people that you're having conversations with. So just because a candidate is interested in your opportunity or your company, really kind of that doesn't necessarily mean that they're ready to seriously consider your company or making a move. And I know that sounds interesting, but with all of the layoffs going on and with all of the noise in the market right now, and this is human nature, I would be doing the same thing. You have more shoppers than ever. You have more people that are willing to take a conversation. They might not have been affected by layoffs in their own company, but their best friend did, or their husband or wife did. And so people really want to keep their options open, if anything, just to reassure themselves that, hey, I'm good where I am. I don't need to make a move. And what that's really doing is it's burning a lot of cycles for hiring managers and key stakeholders in companies. Like that's your time is money. You have maybe a 4-step interview process with your key executives, and you're running 4 or 5 people through that. You extend 2 offers and those 2 don't get accepted. That's a lot of time. So there's a lot of lost opportunity cost in there. So I'd say really just making sure that the intrinsic and extrinsic motivations for the candidates you're interviewing, that they're aligned, and that's going to make sense with where you're going. And then I would just say really kind of the second misconception, and I want to be clear about this. It's not that the crazy comp packages are still the same. It's that there's no longer that bidding war. And so they aren't forced. There's not like arms twisted to make that higher. There's more choices. But yeah, overall, I would say those are the 2 biggest misconceptions. And then I'd also say that just, with all the layoffs, oftentimes we have clients, and unfortunately we're really past this, where now some time has been burned, but there was this idea of like, I'm going to have tons of inbound applicants and they're going to be fantastic. They're growing on trees. They're jumping in the boat. And that's not, when you really look at like companies are more stringent on their criteria now. So it's not the case when you're looking, especially at maybe earlier stage companies, the right DNA for an early stage company, or just, they've seen what that looks like. They understand the nuances with different types of organizations. Those don't necessarily come into your inbox. Those are still something that you have to go out and seek. And make sure that there's overall alignment with attributes, with what that candidate attributes are and what your business outcomes are as an organization.
Yeah. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if they just jumped in the boat, right?
Fantastic. Yeah, I'd be out of business. So on one hand, I'm glad. No, no. And I think that usually another kind of interesting statistic is that it's usually within 2 to 3 weeks that if you are a top performer and you have been laid off, you hit your network, you reach out to your mentors, you post it on LinkedIn. And we're seeing within 3 weeks, most often, like 70% of them within 3 weeks are landing somewhere in that period of time. And where we're really seeing like the extended timelines is where they're like, burnout, I'm going to do this what I want to, I'll get back to you in a month or so. So we're seeing some extended start dates as well. But yeah.
I got it. What
Yeah.
so kind of flipping it around, we were talking about hiring managers earlier. Thinking about the candidates, right? And I think this is most of the people who are joining us are going to be hiring managers and leaders and what have you. But what are the candidates looking for? What should they be looking for when they're considering making a move right now?
Yeah. I think the old days of like, is it a tier one VC and what's the valuation and how quickly did they grow? I think a lot of that has gone to a dull roar. And I think that really what I would strongly suggest candidates do is, first of all, make sure that the role that you're evaluating isn't just good for your next step, but the step after. So always be thinking about kind of like, what am I getting out of this? And then how will that serve me next? And then secondarily, really evaluating the leadership. Again, we're in wartime right now. So where have they done this before? What has their experience been? Have they seen a win? Is there balance in the leadership team? If you've got some first time founders, have they surrounded themselves by maybe some more experienced leaders that can see around corners? So I think that's incredibly important. And also, I really strongly suggest for any candidates as you begin an interview cycle, look for consistency in answers. As you're going through an entire process, make sure that when you're asking about, what the go-to-market idea is, or, oh, you pivoted last year, fantastic. What are you looking for out of that pivot? And what are the steps internally that need to be taken? Just make sure that you're getting consistent answers, because there's nothing that is worse than disjointed leadership that then, you join and you have no idea kind of where you're going. And then
When
I
you
would
say
just
consistent answers, can you unpack that a little bit more? Do you mean like consistency in the responses from the people that you're interviewing with?
I would say consistencies with what the expected outcomes are for the role you're interviewing with. And I'll give you an example. We have a head of marketing role internally right now. The founder very much needs product market, right? He needs a product marketer, he needs messaging, he needs all that good stuff. But the VP of sales is hopping in interviews and saying, I need a demand gen engine. Where is that engine? So we're getting candidates that are coming back and saying, am I going to be set up for success when there's two very different storylines from key stakeholders in here over what this role really is? So, and we're seeing that on the flip side with organizations that are spending much more time really creating tight scorecards and interview processes to make sure that everybody is on the same page for how they're interviewing and what they're interviewing for. Did that answer your question?
Yeah,
Cool.
100%. Yeah.
Cool.
I think like just making sure that like people like you're seeing alignment within the organization, it seems like a very critical thing there. Yeah.
Huge. I would also say, just before we go to the next question, because these are important, one of the biggest reasons we're seeing people leave companies right now is lack of product market fit. So
Mhm.
just ensure that there is product market fit. And that's also something that you want to measure for consistency in the answers across an executive management team. What have you done to do that? How many deals have you closed in that area? Are there customers that are willing to talk about it? Are you pushing product versus it being pulled? Customer retention rates are always another big one. And then just, the basics, what's the runway? When's the next time you're going to need to go out for another round, employee sat, all that good stuff.
Do you guys do you guys have like a checklist on this? Does Canada Labs have like a blog post or a checklist for folks to consider there?
We can definitely send something over. It's something that we have internally. I'd be more than happy to make the asset public for everybody.
I was gonna say, I think that's something that that folks would really enjoy. So I guess one thing that like kind of flipping it around back around to the demand side is, how can companies kind of take advantage of the current layoff situations that are happening? Like, feels to me that there should be an influx of candidates that are happening in the market
Yep.
there, but maybe not. what are you guys kind of seeing there as things that folks can do about that?
I mean, I think if you have roles that are open, it's the time to post those. It's the time to maybe post those in groups that are relevant. So, a marketing group on LinkedIn or a sales group on LinkedIn. So make sure that your audience is going to be the right audience instead of maybe a broader post. So I think that you can create some stickiness there. I also really strongly suggest that you move quickly.
Mhm.
So if you are talking to candidates that have recently been laid off and you're waiting for more in the pipeline, but they feel like they're a great fit, I strongly suggest that companies move quickly and continue to move quickly, not at the expense of having still thorough vetting process, but moving quickly. And I also think utilizing your network. People want to help other people right now. LinkedIn is a love fest right now. I have never seen so much goodwill floating around there. A little negativity, but I get it. It's a crazy time. But like really, post that out there, share it for a friend, make that available. And oftentimes in our networks, like attracts like, and so we're going to have a lot of, I'm sure you have a lot of go-to-market executives in yours. So if you were to
Mhm.
post something, I think you probably would generate some relevant, maybe higher qualified traffic. I strongly suggest on both sides that there's some back channel going on.
Mm.
I don't mean like the back channel at the end where everybody's at risk. I just mean like, if you are interviewing for a company or if a company is talking to a candidate and you know somebody else from that, get the lay of the land, get some context around maybe why the layoffs happened or, what the circumstances were. So you're bringing something to the conversations. I think also another thing that companies can do to really take advantage of the layoffs and make themselves really attractive for candidates right now is to not stop selling your company. We've seen sometimes with the idea of there's a lot of supply, let's shortcut this and just get to grilling them. Candidate experience is still incredibly important. So I think it's really important to roll out that red carpet and continue to sell your company and know that whether or not somebody is laid off, they're going to have options. So treat them accordingly.
Yep, for sure. What about so we're talking about like, you know, bringing new talent in. I think retention is always something that's like top of mind for folks. And given the fact that a lot of folks um might consider that there's like not less folks kind of hiring in the market, it might feel that like retention is a less critical topic to kind of focus in on. Like you might have managers or leaders who are tempted to kind of like take their foot off the gas there. um like what is your kind of thoughts on that? Is it like is a bad hiring market kind of like a retention driver in and of itself?
Yes. For good companies, it absolutely is. The better companies are looking at their employees. If they went through layoffs, they're looking at the employees that are left. If they haven't had to go through layoffs, they're reevaluating, looking at the talent, and we're seeing retention strategies galore. I mean, to my point earlier, it was like, hey, are we benchmarked competitively against other companies in our space right now? Are we paying what is market or sometimes above market? We're seeing proactive changes also where compensation packages are going up for companies without even needing to ask. And that, that's great. We haven't seen that as much just because I think there was such a disparity in what was coming in the door. What's interesting also is we're seeing an investment now in companies that really, for the employees that are there, it's less about kind of the accoutrements and the warm fuzzy, although don't get me wrong, you still want to hold on to your employees and hold them tight, but it's more so how do we better enable them? How do we better train them? We're going into a time where things are more difficult right now and it takes longer to get to outcomes that you need to. So what can we do to help that process? So it's less about that scrappiness, kind of fight it out and figure it out. And we're seeing companies continue to invest in productivity tools, enablement tools, those types of things, which I thought was interesting. And I've had that conversation over and over again, and I was surprised how consistent that feedback was.
Yeah, one of the things that I think we've seen quite a bit is around just like upskilling, because I know you're talking
Yeah.
about like tooling and what have you, but like using the opportunity to to double down on investing in your staff, upskilling them, spending the time on
Training.
enablement cycles and kind of enablement programs and what you're and things like that. Um, so obviously it's like a pretty noisy market right
Mm.
now. Um, what what sort of advice would you have for hiring managers that are trying to kind of cut through that noise and like, really get their message to candidates?
Yep. I would say really take the time. You get out of a meeting, you get out of the Q1 strategic planning meeting, you've built your OKRs and you've got to build, you got to hire a few people. It used to be just, okay, well, yep, I need 3 AEs. Let's go take it to market, whether it's your internal talent team or you call your favorite recruiter, candidate labs. But now, we're seeing companies that are really being thoughtful about the scorecards that they're creating. And they're really looking at what do we most need from this individual from an outcomes perspective, from a culture perspective. What skills are we really looking for? To your point earlier, it's like, okay, I'm selling a technical product. We definitely need to find somebody that's selling to the right persona that understands how to speak. They understand kind of what that rhythm looks like. They understand the procurement process. They understand the size of company, the mid-market AEs going into EAE. That's happening a little bit less without a little bit more time kind of spent with that. So I would just say that really, and those scorecards, not just knowing, what you need, but then, running them by the rest of the interview committee. If it's an EAE hire and you've got a VP of marketing, a VP of sales, a head of CS, and, VP of sales engineering or whatever that looks like, getting everybody's weigh in on what they deem is important for this and making sure that it's a collaborative exercise. Everybody is clued in and everybody knows when they sit down in an interview how to hire for what they're looking for, how to interview for what they're looking for, instead of the lazy way of like, hey, we have an early stage kind of CRM play. People from Salesforce are going to be fantastic. It's like, no, really get thoughtful about what's going to make sense. And again, not just from the skills perspective, but it's the soft skills, absolutely, which again, depending on which stage you're in is really, really critical. So make sure other people are looking at it and you're pressure testing that a little bit. I would say also to cut through some of the noise, and if I could have, eggs thrown at me or old cabbage, but like, because I know this is a little bit polarizing, but like, I'm a big fan of working sessions, and I'm not talking about free work. I'm not talking about, hey, put together my, go to market plan and, oh, you're right. Like,
that always cracks me up.
People were burned. And I get that, especially on the marketing side of things. But like a working session is, come up with a problem that is going to be a consistent problem or issue that candidate in that function is going to be dealing with. Pull them into a working session, see how they communicate, see how they whiteboard, see what their approach is, how they do discovery, how they ask questions, how they arrive to answers, how are they collaborating with all of you. There's a lot that can be extracted from a working session other than just kind of what's written on that whiteboard. So I'm a firm believer of the working sessions. And then lastly, I would say how to cut through some of the noise is like, when you can, meet your people in person. Like, remember we used to do that? And remember those days? And it's like, I know everybody's moving so quickly, but like, there's so much to be said for a face-to-face meeting, sitting down, breaking bread, seeing how people are. Just, do we have that connection? And I know there's a lot of decentralized workforces, there's a lot that are coming in now, and we're seeing that iteratively more and more. But like, get to know your people before you join them, because I've seen things are going gangbusters, and at the end when they sit down, they're like, meh, it wasn't there. And that's okay too. It's for both sides.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I'm here at HRM. We're huge fans of what we call job simulation. And so like, I think a lot of the times you can do job simulation that that will help you understand the, like, does this person have the chops in a way that's like low lift for
Yes.
folks.
Yes.
And so like, yeah, put together a 30, 60, 90 plan. Like, that's not low lift, right?
No.
But as an example, one of the things that we do with SDR hiring and AE hiring is, we have like written intakes actually, and literally it's just like a dozen questions that are kind of like biographical in nature,
Yep.
where it's not like, hey, like, write a bunch of prospecting emails for me, or like, XYZ, but instead it's, hey, what's something that you've built that you're really proud of, right? Like,
Mhm.
what's your, teach me something that you're really interested in a couple of paragraphs. And what you really quickly can do is you can, determine, does this person, can this person think straight? Can they tell a story? Do they have good attention to detail, or is the asset that they put together just like riddled with typos? And like, actually, I mean, the shocking thing is like, probably like 50% of the time the person just like doesn't even do it. And which is funny because like you found out what you needed to find out,
You
right? Like,
self-selected yourself right out. Yeah.
yeah, like, it's like you told on yourself, but
Yeah.
in a way that is low like low lift and not like super problematic. And I
Mhm.
think people end up enjoying that kind of approach, versus something that's like a little bit more, um I don't know, like harder core, if you will. And like you can oftentimes get good information, right?
Totally.
Such that like you can get the information that's going to help you understand like what it is that you're trying to do without like a very substantial lift on the part of the candidate.
I think sometimes the more intense kind of panels or 30, 60, 90s are sometimes because, the interviewers don't know how to interview for what they're looking for.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to throw together something. And I can't tell you how many candidates cut and paste that anyways. They have a 30, 60, 90 that they trot out, they change the logo. And I would too. It's hours and hours.
Well, yeah,
Interviewing,
totally, right.
it's like auditioning for a part you don't know you want. So
Yeah.
it's really, I love the idea of kind of low lift, but still tied back to how are we measuring for the things that we need, that we know are going to be, instrumental to the success for the role.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk a little bit more about the interview process, and specifically, how have you seen? Because we were talking about like filtration and kind of like job simulation. How have you seen compensation factor into the interview process?
Oh, interesting question. Um, what I'm seeing is, well, I mean, we really try as a search firm, and I'm just speaking kind of anecdotally, like we try as a search firm to really share market data prior to taking a search to market, because what you don't want to do is burn through good candidates that are your 10 out of 10s, are born for this job, they're excited, you're excited about them, only to have a misalignment on compensation early on. So I think really just from a company's perspective, really doing your homework on what compensation really looks like out there. Because what I'm seeing is that candidates, the good candidates that have, track records of success that they can speak to very, very clearly and eloquently, candidates are holding fast to compensation requirements. And, I think sometimes, we can share that information. Candidates can be clear about that up front. You have companies sometimes that are like, yeah, I get that. I get that. But let me just talk to them anyways. You go through an interview cycle, and then at the end, the candidate's not willing to move and a company's not willing to, meet them where they need to, where the candidate laid the expectation. And there's a lot of, cycles burned on both sides. So I would just say, for compensation, just save everybody time. Be very, very clear on the front end. And I know there's some states where if there's job postings now, I think New York is one of them, like you have to actually list what the compensation is. So I would say that's kind of one thing how I've seen it way into the interview process, and it's also dangerous. You want to be careful with that, because I've also unfortunately seen a lot of examples of like candidates moving through an interview process. They know the comp isn't quite there, but they're still willing to go through the process. And at the end, they're taking offers and they're using them for counter offers, which again, like they're trying to protect themselves, maybe try and better their current situation. Again, it's a lot of time wasted. So it's all a very long-winded way of saying just make sure that there's alignment early on with what the expectations are, because how candidates are viewed. I can say like, what's your culture like? And that's like describing the color blue, right? Like we have ping pong, like candidates measure culture by, are you doing what you say you're going to do? Because that's important to me right now. That indexes highly for me right now. So it's just really important, I think, from a transparency and an expectation perspective, get that out in the front. If there is wiggle room, then the candidate needs to know that, hey, I need to show up and really prove why I might be on the higher end of the scale. But I just say early alignment is the best way to circumvent a lot of wasted time.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, avoiding wasted time is like obviously like super critical there. I think, yeah, I think the challenge there, of course, and I wonder how the new kind of pay transparency laws are
Yeah,
impacting this. Do you remember, like, obviously you're the expert on this. Which states is that? It's California, and
New
is it
York,
New York?
New York for
Got
sure.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I like, obviously that would help save some time, but of course then there's, organizations like Netflix who are like, yes, the role is between 50 and $500,000.
And you're like, that's
Um,
helpful. Thanks. Yeah,
yeah.
that's helpful. And usually, whenever you give ranges, people always say they're on the higher end of it anyway, especially salespeople, because we're negotiators. I get that. But yeah, it's just like, put it out there. Now, we legally, search professionals cannot ask any candidates what they're making currently. So it's all about
Mhm.
what are their expectations. I would say probably 80% of the time they offer it just to make sure that there's a fit and they're not wasting
Mhm.
time. But yeah, and I would say those laws are probably going to be more ubiquitous throughout the country going forward. And I get why, you want parity among compensation packages for men and women. Like, I understand the reasoning behind it. It has made it a little bit difficult sometimes in trying to, make sure that you're not wasting anybody's time on the front end when you're going through the qualification process. But,
Yeah. That's funny about the thing about like not asking for existing kind of compensation,
yeah,
because I mean the old joke is like, show me your W-2.
I
Like,
remember that.
you can tell me what you want all day long, but like
Totally.
the proof is in the pudding. I mean, I think there's an interesting question there, which is like, how do you validate past performance then?
God, I remember those days. And I'm so old. I was like, fax me your W-2s. Okay.
No.
That's in the day that I was operating in. I think do the math. Do the math. Like, if you can run simple math, especially there in sales, and you're able to understand, okay, what was your quota? Because you can very much break down attainment. You can understand attainment. You can understand kind of a breakdown of compensation with percentages. It's not illegal to ask all of that. So if you can back that out of there and say, so what are you accustomed to, making at the end? If you are able to hit your $1 million number, which you said you had, where does that bring you at the end of the year at plan? So it's kind of like unpacking what the plan looks like, and then you can understand kind of where they sat along attainment. And it's sometimes you would be so surprised how many times you run the numbers. I've had VPs of sales run the numbers, and it's like, this is BS. Like, these numbers don't make any sense at all. So
Hmm.
it's my
Well,
two
that's
cents.
right, because everybody overperforms quota on their LinkedIn profile, right?
Everybody's President's Club. Come on now.
So funny. Like, your words, not mine, that you've been doing this for a hot second. Um, how how does this market shift kind of compare to prior market shifts, would you say?
Gosh. Um, Well, I'm kind of like, I was OG with the original.com bubble bursting back in the
OG.
day. I'm like, I was there for it. I remember walkyourdog.com. You had an idea, you got money. Um, yeah,
WalkYourDog.com.
it
That
was
might have
like,
happened this time around too. I think that was called WAG.
yeah, it was, hey, nothing wrong with that. Keep it down. But no, I think that the days of just like,
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of self correction going on right now. And I understand
Hmm.
so much of it is painful. And like I said in the beginning, like, I really want to pause for the cause and all of this, because there's a lot of people being affected by this that, after COVID, they moved, they relocated. Hey, I can work from anywhere. Oh my gosh, now I'm no longer with this company and I'm not seeing the options I did. So there's a lot of serious stuff going on right now. But I really do think that there's a correction coming down where it's not about hyper growth. It's about thoughtful growth. It's about growth and then operational kind of efficiencies and building the operational capabilities behind that to sustain that. So there's just a lot more logic, I think, that's starting to reemerge, that I haven't necessarily seen a lot of over the past few years. And there's tons of companies doing it right. I don't want to paint anybody in a box, but I just think that was probably the closest, that original kind of 2000 .com
Hmm.
burst. I think what happened in 2009 was we were less affected in the tech industry. It was a lot of financial services, and you could still get VC funding. But I would say that I think that comparatively, yes, there are a lot of layoffs, but when you really put that in perspective with how many hires were actually made,
Right.
it's smaller percentages. I was looking at the Amazon numbers and the Salesforce numbers, and it's like, yeah, that's a substantial number, but oh my God, you hired 500,000 people last year. Like, geez.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think a lot of these things too is just like organizations that just like got out like it's almost like a smoothing thing. Like they just got out
Yes.
a little bit ahead of their skis.
Yeah.
It's like oopsie daisy, you hired like oopsie daisy, you hired 2024's class
I know.
in 2022. We'll get back to that
Yeah.
maybe in 2024, but in the meantime that you can't have them sitting around. Like actually, I think there's kind of like a little bit of like a 10% of teacup around Benioff talking about productivity or like productivity of the staff that was hired during the pandemic, and of course everyone
Oh,
reacts to that and it's
here we
like,
go.
are you
Where's
calling
your
us calling us lazy? But I think there actually might be a like a more nuanced approach of that, which is you pulled forward all this hiring in order to exploit and capitalize on demand
Yeah.
that maybe wasn't there quite yet.
Yeah.
um, and
Yeah.
then of course in a higher interest rate environment, there's going to be lower demand in general. But it's kind of like one of those things where it's almost kind of like a not now versus a not with us, where it's like, hey, we accidentally hired you, we don't need you right now, we need you in like 18 months, like my bad.
I know.
Right.
I
and
remember
and
those posts where people were getting like offers rescinded. They were like that. That's heartbreaking.
Yeah, but I think it just kind of speaks to like there's nothing fundamentally problematic. Like, Jason Lincoln talks about this a lot. Like there's nothing fundamentally problematic with like SaaS. Like it turns out, and of course, like most of your clients are probably SaaS
Mhm.
organizations, and same with Atrium. It turns out that like SaaS is still like a very powerful thing, and like addressing like problems exist, and if you're able to fit into a solution to those problems and resolve that and drive value for an organization and deliver it in a subscription fashion, and ideally without like a heavy initial setup, like all the trappings of SaaS, that's going to be a good thing for organizations. And so like that
Mhm.
hasn't changed at all. It's just a question of like how quickly organizations are adopting that.
Yeah.
um, and so I think the good news is a lot of these folks will kind of like resettle back into organizations that need them versus, organizations like, like I'm kind of, um, you know, I remember in 2021 trying to hire, and you have these like large organizations because it kind of cascades all the way down. Like you have Salesforce with like an ungodly amount of money, or maybe like Verkada or
Yep.
Samsara or what have you with an ungodly amount of money, who's just like, yeah, you know what, like we'll pay whatever for whoever, and moreover, like, and so that just like raises the whole market, the demand of the market up.
Yes. Yeah.
And it also creates like unwarranted expectation in terms of like SDR matriculation, or like like SMB to commercial to mid market to enterprise reps, et cetera, et cetera. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of folks that like got out over their skis. Actually, you were kind of noting this earlier. Folks that got out over their skis, like, oh yeah, like I'm totally an enterprise seller. It's like, man, you just talked to like someone who's not a decision maker whatsoever, and you like are forecasting this deal, and this is like, you know what I mean? And so I think that there's like that hasn't done a lot of those staff any favors to like garner that title and
Totally.
that bump in base or what have you, if they're not going to be able to attain because they don't have the skill
Yep.
profile.
Exactly.
So I think it's going to be healthy to rebalance there. I mean, actually, I think this is an interesting question. Are you guys seeing yourselves, like, I'm sure you have this data, placing people who are like people you placed previously, like replacing them again, but like in a lower like title, if you will, like like, oh, okay, cool, you were an enterprise rep or a mid-market rep or whatever, and like now we're rebasing, like you're coming back, like you got laid off and now you're coming back around again as a commercial rep or as an SMB rep or whatever, or like, maybe you got maybe you got hired as an SMB AE or what have you after being an SDR for 9 months, but it turns out like you didn't have a lot of customer facing like experience, and we're kind of more of like an outreach jockey, and it turns out that like those customer facing chops aren't there. That person's gets laid off and then goes back to be an SDR again for like, maybe another 9 months or 12
Yeah.
months. Are you seeing any of that behavior?
We're not seeing it from people we placed. We would never work with people that we placed. If they're still
Pardon me.
working.
I mean, if they've been riffed,
Right, right,
right? They
right. No,
leave and they come, they get riffed, or they're like, hey, this
yeah.
organization isn't what it's cracked up to be. I'm going to come back inbound as a candidate. That's fair game.
They're boomerang candidates. Yeah, we
Yeah.
call them boomerang candidates, and they want to
Yep.
go back to where they're comfortable,
Mhm.
and where they know what they're doing, and where they know they can be successful. Like,
Mhm.
I've been SMB for the past, 3 years, and yep, I jumped up because I wanted to, and this was what's next in my career. But ultimately, that's a lot, and the pressure is insane because the valuation of that company is through the roof. And so, yeah, we are seeing candidates that before were only willing to do a step up, or a step up from that, even, which was crazy, is now like there's very much a lateral move again. There's very much, and good,
Mhm.
because they are getting additional good experience. That's only going to get them,
Yeah, like building muscles.
exactly. Yeah, it's not the quest for the title. There's nothing worse than getting the title, not performing, and then, when you're in an interview, well, why didn't you do well? Well, you took a whack at it, and obviously, was it you that weren't successful? It's like you really have to be thoughtful about that. I see that with a lot of first-time VPs too, that might not
Mhm.
be ready for it, but that's what they want, darn it. And then it's not successful because they maybe haven't necessarily built those muscles. And the next time they go interview, it's like, well, you didn't do well that time. Why not? Well, maybe you weren't quite ready.
Yeah, it's almost like I wonder what the right analogy is here. It's kind of like I don't know, maybe it's like selling a house and like you go out like too high and now you have to like bring it down. And of course, like, those price discounts, like the other realtors see that, or like the other people see, and they're like, uh-huh, 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 uh-huh.
Totally.
Versus like, hey, if you started out at the right place and just crush it as like an SMB rep or a mid-market rep or what have you, um, and like, take the time to really, really like sharpen your knives and like
Yes.
hone your craft,
Yeah.
that can be a much more productive thing in the long run versus, gosh, it's almost like it's kind of like taking a down round as an organization, but it's like a human capital down round.
Yeah. It's a good way to put that. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that we're kind of coming up on time right now, but if you're like, you guys see a lot of leading indicators in hiring land, right? Because you see the JDs that are open. I always joke about the recruiters have the best gossip. Um,
Oh, always. Yeah.
oh, it's crazy, right? Like,
Me.
oh, I'm seeing a lot of resumes from this company. It's like, uh-huh, cool. That's a good leading
Yeah.
indicator, right? Um, So obviously you guys have a little bit of a crystal ball there, both on the hiring side, both on the demand side and also on the supply side. What do you think is in store for 2023 then?
So, obviously, and we're seeing it already, I think there's going to be, hiring is going to slow down. So there's going to be less hiring, but incredibly, like the hiring that is made is going to be incredible. It's going to be imperative. It's going to be important to moving the needle forward to your business for a number of reasons that are all evidenced. So I think that, interview processes are going to be better. I think that, cycles are going to be tighter. I think the hires that you do make are going to be stickier, and they're going to stay longer, and they're going to be better fits. I also think that we're going to start to see, we're going to continue, unfortunately, to see continued top grading in companies, as needs are there. You're doing more, companies are doing more with less, and so you really want to, if you're in an organization, make sure that if you are a little bit about like in front of your skis, make sure that you're doing what you can to beef up your skills and to stay ahead and abreast of that. Um, And yeah, because I think some of those people are going to be tested in a way that maybe they haven't prior, and there's less places to hide with less people, and there's going to be deliverables that need to happen quickly. I think with the huge cut, one of the biggest cut functions actually in companies, whether you're large or small, is the talent function. And so I think that hiring managers are they're going to be dividing their time into doing some recruiting until recruiting budgets open back up, which we're seeing already happen. It's a little bit more cost effective actually than hiring a full-time talent person, where you need that person to hire at scale. But you're really seeing hiring managers' time now split, where they've got to be on more than ever now, but they also have a key, two key hires to make this quarter. And so I think there's just going to be a lot of like kind of time management around that, and how do we do it effectively, and how do we leverage our networks or resources in order to get those things done. But I think overall, I mean, it's so lumpy, and search is lumpy in general. I laugh because I'm the search person on my exec leadership team. So I've got these brilliant Princeton, MIT, serial entrepreneurs, and I'm like, hey, been in search for 25 years. It's all going to be cool, like, because it really will. These are all positive things that are happening that I think overall are just going to build stronger, businesses that are more foundationally sound than maybe what was being propped up before. So I'm kind of like, hey, hang with it, do what you can, do what you can to stay positive through all of this, because for every down there will be an up. And just also, I'd say kind of lastly, like, it's really important for, I think, candidates to really, if they are in a laid off situation or considering something new, to really think about, where did you have the best time? Where were you most successful? And how do I replicate that again? What did that environment, what did that tech stack, what did all of those things look like? So I think energy is going to be important this year. So make sure that when you are expending energy, it's going to be into things that are better serving you, both personally and professionally.
That is very hippie. We were talking about that
Like
in
that? I know,
the green
crunchy,
room.
right?
It was perfect.
Mhm.
Wonderful. Well, Kendra, we're out of time here. This was super awesome. Thank you for dropping so much knowledge on sales hiring. I think there's a lot of folks who are kind of trying to figure that out right now. Folks, thank you for joining us. Next week, we're going to have Chris Kalkin, who's the VP of Revenue at Census. Census makes really sweet reverse ETL software, so that should be really fun. So Kendra, thank you very much for taking the time to spend time with us, and have a great rest of your week. Okay.
You as well. Thanks so much.
Okay. Bye.